set a timer, or Trey's going to get the hook at the end of my talk, and I don't shut up. Good afternoon. Let's see what slide we got up here. I got married about 8 years ago, and on the day I got married, my wife, they're supposed to put on something old and something blue, and she was just wearing a little bitty white dress, and there wasn't really any place to put anything blue. And so she wrote with a blue paint marker on the bottom of her shoe, her life verse, which is Romans 8:28. And for those of you who haven't heard it, it's on email signatures and posters and things around our house, and I've become very familiar with it. But Romans 8:28 says that we know in all things that God works for good to those who know Him and have been called according to His purpose. And when I read a scripture verse, I have a tendency to do this like rubber band method, where I stretch it out and see what's supporting it, what comes after it, and then I try to shave it down to the smallest possible size that still carries the message. And so in Romans 8:28, it kind of reduces down to in all things God works. And if you were to stretch it out to the other extreme, it says, for Romans 8:29 is followed by Romans 8:29 that says, for those God foreknew, He also predestined. So foreknew means to me that He knew me before I knew Him. And predestined means He had a plan. And what I'd like to share with you today is some of the evidence of that plan that the Lord had in my life, that I can look back and see little Easter eggs of where He was trying to show up in my life. And I had no idea. I didn't know Him. He knew me. He had a plan for me that I wasn't aware of. And He began to create opportunities and situations that caused me to step into that plan. It also goes on to say that those He predestined, He also called. And the predestination is the plan that He has for your life. The calling is when He begins to reveal that plan to you. And over the last few years, that plan has become more and more revealed, and it's been a real blessing. So without further ado, I'll kick off with the origin of my existence starts with this picture. This is my dad in 1965. He was shot in the hand in the Watts riots, and at the time he was working days, my mom was working nights, and from what he tells me, they didn't get much time together. And while he was on a medical leave for his bullet wound, he got my mother pregnant. He told me I was the result of the magic bullet. And at that time, some of you guys are old enough to remember the Kennedy assassination, and they had this controversy of the magic bullet that went in Connolly's shoulder and came out his wrist and shot Kennedy in the neck and came out and went in his chest and all that. So my dad said if I wouldn't have got shot that day, you wouldn't be here. My mom and dad were both Los Angeles police officers. My dad went on to be a captain. And during his time as a captain, he kind of let that... He was a captain in Hollywood division, and so he got to rub elbows with a lot of what the world would call important people, famous people and whatnot. A lot of that went to his head. He was on a power trip. He ended up having some issues with his position in the department, getting a little big for his britches. He also had some infidelity that caused my parents to divorce. And so in that, you know, it was, there's some things I learned about from my father that were just, but there's some things I didn't. He was a good father, but he wasn't a good husband. I didn't know that. So growing up, my parents divorced when I was 7 years old. Just a little bit before my 8th birthday, it was right about the time my dad moved out of the house. He had left behind his stepfather who lived with us, who was a World War I veteran who, when my grandmother died, they didn't know what to do with him, so he came to live with us. Then my parents divorced, and he was just kind of a ghost in our house. He lived in the master bedroom. We didn't see him much. That part of the house smelled like Ben Gay, and every now and then he staggered out the door to go to the bar, and every now and then he staggered back in. You know, that's all I knew of him. One Saturday morning, he decided to take his own life, and me and my sister found him. And so I was a first-hand witness to a gunshot suicide of a guy that, you know, they used to let you take your gun home after the war, apparently, in World War I. He had his Army-issued Colt 45, and it was like a land cannon. And so I saw this guy bleeding out, and I remember at the time, life was pretty charming and happy-go-lucky. I was just a happy, honest little kid. And that was the first taste I had of the fact that there's a darker side to life, and there's some things that are scary and horrible, and that there would possibly be a reason in somebody's life that they're so miserable they don't want to live another day. I would come to learn how that feels later in life, but at the time it was a surprise to me. My parents both being cops, you know, my mom was a homicide detective, my dad was worked in the narcotics division most of his career. And after my grandfather committed suicide, they just like cleaned up the blood, disinfected that into the house, and everybody just moved on. There was no therapy, there was no, you know, trauma counseling or anything like that. And I remember it was just like brushed under the carpet. And about 2 or 3 weeks after he died, I just remember asking my mom, "Can I have Grandpa's room?" And that was it. I got his room. And I just moved on. And not realizing at the time that it did some damage, that there was some trauma experienced, and that would start to show itself in years to come. So my dad passed away when I was 14. He had a massive coronary heart attack. He was only 47. From that point on, I was raised by a single mom who was an active duty police officer that worked a lot of long hours. And I was starting to get involved in drugs, alcohol, fornication, just anything you could think of that was outside the norm. I would like fast cars, fast money, fast, loud music. I wanted to be where the party was at, and the people that I hung with were that type of people. So I started getting into the cocaine scenario where, you know, at the time they were starting to produce a lot of crack cocaine in Los Angeles, and it was available in a lot of places. You didn't have to have a connection. You could just drive down the street and get it. And so I got sucked into that world, and there was one particular evening that a buddy of mine who happened to be the son of a Pentecostal pastor who had sort of backslid, if you will. We were out looking for cocaine and couldn't find any. And he said, "I got an idea. Let's go by the church on the way." And I remember saying, "The church on the way to what?" "Well, on Sherman Way in North Hollywood, there's a church called the Church on the Way. And it's a Pentecostal Foursquare church where his dad was one of the founders of the church. They had a meeting there on Wednesday nights. It was called the Victor's Circle. It was similar to an AA meeting. And so he tells me on the way in, he goes, "Have you ever been to an AA meeting?" And I said, "I think I might have." And he said, "This is like an AA meeting, but they have the Holy Spirit here." I didn't know what the Holy Spirit was or anything about that, so I just sat in the back of the room. They all knew Bert. He'd been there before. They were like, "Brother Bert, we're great to see you back at the fold," and all this stuff. And so at the end of it, they say, "Can you introduce us to your friend?" There was about 10 men in the room. And so they introduced him to me, and they tell us a little about yourself. And I was really honest with them. I said, "We were out looking for cocaine, couldn't find it, so we ended up here." At that point, all 10 of those guys got up and started circling around me. I think the ringleader gave the rest of them a signal or something. Next thing you know, I'm in the circle, and these guys are laying hands and praying. And the guy at the head of the group reached in his pocket and pulled out some kind of oil and put it on my forehead, and they were laying hands, and they were all praying something different at the same time. I had never been anything like that. That blew my mind, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Something happened that night. And I'll tell you what the change was. This might be foreign to some of you. There's probably a couple people in this room that can relate. Every time I did cocaine after that, I got paranoid. And I'll tell you now, looking back, I think the Holy Spirit went to stalking me after that night. And so I would do cocaine no matter where I was. I could hear doorknobs turning. I could hear something rustling in another room. There was always somebody that might be in the backseat of the car. I mean, I had no rest. And so that went on for years. I graduated from cocaine to methamphetamine and worked my way into a situation where I was basically kind of on the lower tier of the dope food chain and worked my way up into being really friendly with a guy who was manufacturing crystal meth. During those years, I got my girlfriend pregnant. We had 4 kids over 12 years. I was a terrible father. I wasn't married to her, but I was a terrible spouse, or whatever you want to call it, domestic partner. Did not provide well for my family. I couldn't keep a job. I did have some construction trade skills that over the years I developed, but I just couldn't hold down a job because I was not reliable. And a lot of people, it's always the same story. We love you when you're here. We love the work that you do, but we just need to be able to count on you. We're going to have to let you go. So I did a lot of work. I do a lot of day labor jobs, doing, standing out in front of Home Depot and putting myself out there so I could get $100 a day's work. And during that time, a guy picked me up one day, and they were always curious that a guy that had carpenter tools and ability and seemed fairly healthy was out there, I was an American citizen, I didn't have any citizenship issues. Why would you be out in front of Home Depot looking for day labor? Why don't you have a real job? And so people were always curious and they asked questions. This one guy, he was a property development or property manager for residential properties, and they would do make-readies for houses that were getting ready to be put up for rent. And so we were renovating his house and we were making a run to the dump. And I remember we were in San Bernardino, California on the way to the landfill. And, of course, I'm trying to put my best foot forward. I'm just trying to earn a day's work. I'm not trying to divulge any of my drama to these guys. And the guy driving down the road, he said, "So what do? Do you go to church?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "What church do you go to?" And I didn't have an answer, so I said, "Well, I haven't been to church lately." And he said, "But you know Jesus." And then I remembered those guys that laid their hands on me. I thought, shoot, if I tell them I don't know Jesus, next thing you know, we're going to be on the side of the road and lay hands on me, trying to drag me to the sinner's prayer or something, So I've been on this Christian roll, like, "Oh yeah, I know Jesus. Me and Jesus are like this." I told him. And he slowed the car down and he turned to me and he said, "Do you know he loves you so much?" And a tear started welling up in his eye. And a tear started welling up in my eye. And in that moment, I thought, this is the least masculine thing I've ever done in my life. I'm sitting here looking at this guy face to face, and I'm starting to cry. And it really kicked me off. I was looking the other way and, trying not to cry. And I look back on that. I didn't know Jesus, and I wasn't ready to know Jesus, and I sure the heck wasn't looking to know Jesus. But I'll tell you what, that guy was speaking the truth to me, and my heart was starving for the truth, okay? I didn't know that, and so hearing the truth, I was overwhelmed with what I will say today was the Holy Spirit filling me in that moment, and not knowing what to do with that, right? That when the light invades, darkness doesn't know what to do. I didn't know how to act. I didn't know how to respond to that. And so, anyways, skipping ahead a little bit, I ended up getting out of California. I had a lot of really bad experiences with the law, burned all my bridges with the family. Girlfriend that I met said, she has some family in Palestine, Texas. She was trying to get here. So I helped her get to Palestine, Texas, and I landed a job doing in a subdivision, stick framing houses. And it was such a small subdivision that I'd work for the concrete guy until we poured the slabs, and he'd be out of work for a couple of months. And I worked for the framer till we framed the house, and then the concrete guy would get another slab to pour. And I just jumped back and forth like that. It fit really well into my, the fact that I wasn't very responsible, it wasn't very reliable. So I was jumping back and forth from company to company. One day, I realized I'd moved to Palestine, Texas, didn't have any drug connections there, and I wasn't clean and sober per se, but I didn't have a meth habit for the first time in a long time. And I was enjoying that. I was enjoying the fact that I wasn't chained to this drug that had me. Because crystal meth, the problem with that is that even when you realize you want to quit, you can't get up. You can't get motivated. You can't go out to work. You can't do anything without it. And so there comes a point after 2 or 3 weeks of just laying around like a zombie that you just get up and go get some more dope because you just got to be, just to be productive. And so I was in that scenario, and I just about kicked the crystal meth at that point. I saw a guy hop off a tractor and walk across the job site. And the way he walked and the way he talked and his jittery nature, I just said, that guy knows where to get some dope. I would guarantee it. I would bet anything on it. I made friends with him and came to find out that he wasn't just the only game in town, but he was manufacturing his own dope and doing it on a very small scale just to support his own habit. Me, on the other hand, I had visions of grandeur. I want to get next to this guy, learn how to cook dope, and let's take over the world, right? They call it Scarface syndrome, where you want the big pile of dope, lots and lots of money, and guns and money and all this stuff. And I thought that was going to, be the answer, because really, at the end of the day, I always thought there was something broken in me, but all I really needed was an unlimited supply of cash, women, and drugs, and all of those broken things would be fixed. And so the Lord, in His divine wisdom, actually allowed for me to have that and made a way for that to happen. And I eventually ended up getting involved in manufacturing crystal meth. And, it was a bad scene. I can remember a guy calling me one time telling me, "Don't sell any more dope to my wife." And I kind of started to rear up on him, and he said, "No, this is serious. My wife has a drug problem. You're who she sourced from. Your number's in her phone. You better stop selling her drugs." And I remember taking that very seriously. I had a lot of respect for that. And there were situations like that over and over again where I began to realize that now that I'm the big guy with the big bag of dope, I'm not really the answer to other people's problems. I'm the cause of it. and marriages were falling apart. Little happy little trailer parks that were cozy little places to live turned into high crime areas with prostitution and people ripping each other off and staying up all night. And I got to be part of the demise of a community that was starting to fall to this drug. And we were making it out in the woods in East Texas, out, the Piney woods, and we'd hike way out there where no one could find us. And we would bury all the evidence. And I remember just thinking, this is like printing $100 bills. There's no way they could ever catch us out here. We never cooked in the same place twice. I just had all these little procedures that we would put in place to protect us. And I remember thinking, the only way I'm ever going to get off dope is if I can go stay somewhere for like 2 or 3 months and not have to go to work and be provided for. Well, apparently the Texas Department of Criminal Justice had a solution for that. And I started realizing that I'm going to end up going to prison before this ends, because I'm not getting all this stuff any other way. I never knew how that was going to happen, though, because we were so good at getting away with putting dope in the woods, and we just thought we'd never get caught. February the 1st, 2003 was a big day for me, because on the 1st of the month, Halliburton gets paid, Sloan J gets paid, all the women that get child support get their check, welfare mamas get their check, and if you're selling dope, that's the day to have a lot of dope. So the night before the 1st of the month, we've been up for 2 days making big batches of dope, and it's going to be a big payday on the 1st of the month. And I've been awake for 4 or 5 days. And I was caretaker on this farmhouse that was on 77 acres where we used to go cook dope a lot. I kind of leveraged that deal from a buddy of mine. And so I was in a sweet spot, like I said, and there was no evidence of how I would ever get caught doing what I did. I just felt so well protected. And I wake up, I'd fallen asleep on the couch. When I fell asleep, I didn't take my shoes off and put my pajamas on and crawl into a snuggly bed. It was like I was sitting upright in my boots and I slumped over wherever it happened to be. That might be in my truck, that might be on someone's couch, that might be anything. I happened to fall asleep on the couch at this farmhouse, and I woke up to an explosion and everybody showing up over there going, "Did you hear that?" We turned on the radios in our trucks and we're listening and trying to figure out what it was, because it sounded like something like, it was just hard, it's like a nuclear bomb had gone off or something. And as it turned out, the space shuttle Columbia had fallen apart over Dallas, Texas, going 17,000 miles an hour. And when you're going that fast, what falls apart over Dallas, Texas lands in Palestine. And especially if it's on the way to Florida, it was like directly into the flight path. And so all of this debris, 84,000 pounds of debris was what was recovered. And that's about a third of what the total weight of the space shuttle was. And all of that happened like in the woods where we would cook dope, like in our place, in our spot. And which, was not that big of a deal at first, but then when, 20,000 federal agents converged on the area to find pieces of the space shuttle, and the news was there, and the military was there, they were flying grid lines over the trees, and it was like something out of Twilight Zone. And again, I'm already, on dope and paranoid and not sleeping right now. This is all going on. It was kind of devastating. It was bad for business. It was extremely bad for business. But it also it was revealing. So some things were revealed and some things were found. And what happened was they discovered the federal agents and the NASA people and all the people that are out there combing the ground with metal detectors looking for space shuttle debris were finding the remnants of meth labs all over the whole woods, and reporting back to the local sheriff department, which was a big embarrassment for the Anderson County Sheriffs, hence the launch of what they launched the Dogwood Trails Narcotics Task Force. And if that doesn't sound like the most redneck group of drug agents, that's what they were. It was from several different lines. A couple of different county sheriff department, a couple of different police departments banded together, and there was this narcotics task force. And their aim was to get to the bottom of what we were doing. And over the next year, I just started watching everybody I knew go to jail. And of course, common sense, which I had very little of, told me, stop doing what you're doing, move far away, the gig is up. And I just kept going. And I remember knowing during that time that, at that time I cried out to God is what I did. And I remember crying out to the Lord and saying, Lord, if you're real, that's my first prayer was, is that if you're real, then I need you to reveal yourself, number one. And number two, that if you really are real and you really created me and you're the divine creator, you didn't create me to be doing this. Because I was wrecking lives, I was a bad person, and I had evidence of that all around me. And people that I thought owed me favors and should be loyal to me, they didn't. They hated me because I was the cause of their demise. And so, anyways, long story short, I was the last man standing on March the 29th. People snitched on me, and drug addicts will tell on their best friend in a heartbeat to get out spending one day in jail. And so, I found all these people I thought should have been loyal to me. They turned on me. They were getting in trouble. And then goes up the food chain. But when you're the guy manufacturing the drugs and they arrest you, there's no one left to tell on because you're the top guy. And so I thought I was all that for a minute, and then I got busted, and then there was no one left to tell on. I was the end of the road. And so when that happened, I remember I cried out to God. I said, hey, get me out of this. And I just felt like, maybe that my prayer fell upon deaf ears. Maybe I was just insane because I was out in the woods talking with someone who wasn't there. Or maybe there was a God and maybe he did hear my prayer. Not too long after that, I started getting on the cops' radar in a very significant way. They were leaving little messages for me all around town again, which coincides with me already being paranoid. And then you've got cops telling people that they're looking for you on a regular basis. That was really, no peace whatsoever. And on March the 29th, 2004, I was raided, and a girl who let me in and stay at her place actually went and called the police and said, he's over at my house, go get him. And what I didn't realize was that she said when she woke up that morning and saw me sleeping in her bed, she realized she had hit bottom. I was like, that certainly gives me a different opinion of myself. So anyway, they raided me, I got busted, and they carried me away. I kid you not. I realized that the God that I had screamed out to, that I had prayed to out in the woods, had heard my prayer. And he was responding. And he did have a plan for my life. And things began to get revealed to me. I remember I went to the Anderson County Jail. I spent my 38th birthday in the Anderson County Jail. And this was in 2004. And I got a Bible from one of the jailhouse volunteers that came in to bring church. And I remember he said, let's start off in the book of Exodus today. And in county jail, some of you guys might know, they smuggle in tobacco, but there's nothing to smoke on. So they take the Bible and tear pieces out of the Bible and the Bible paper and those cheap Bibles for a cigarette. And so I remember saying, my Bible doesn't have Exodus. My Bible starts in Leviticus. And this guy says, well, here. And he gave me his own personal Bible. And when he gave me that Bible, I remember thinking, well, where am I going to start reading this thing? And I remember years ago, I was panhandling for gasoline, and the guy in the gas station gave me $20 to fill my gas tank at that time. You could do that. And he put $20 in my tank, and I said, man, how can I ever thank you? And he says, if you'd like to thank me, read the book of John. And I remember just saying, the book of what? The book of John. It's one of the Gospels. And I was like, one of the what? It's in the Bible. Oh, that book. Okay, yeah, I'll make a point of reading that, right? Well, here 12 years later, I'm sitting in the county jail, crack open the book of John, and I read about a man who had been an invalid for 38 years. Well, I was 38 years old when I read this, and to me, the Bible just came to life in my hands right in that moment. I said, man, and I looked at the word invalid, and I thought, man, it's like invalid. I feel kind of invalid. My life is kind of for nothing up to this point. I have nothing to be proud of. I have nothing no legacy I want to leave to my children. So anyways, all I have to say, the Bible came to life here at that time, and I began pursuing my relationship with the Lord. I embraced that 3 years out of the 10-year sentence that I got as an opportunity to really get down to brass tacks. And I remember taking a class. There was this class in prison that they made me take called Voyager. The guy that put out the class, he said, you can change your perspective from being angry at the cops who arrested you, angry at the snitch who snitched on you, angry at the judge who sentenced you, and angry at the guards who are keeping you here. Right? Who feels that way? That was like everybody in the room. He said, or you can be grateful that this happened to you. Grateful for the opportunity to turn your life around. Grateful for a second chance to make a new start in life. And you can walk out of here and never have to come back. And I hung on to what he said, and I started embracing prison ministry, Mike Barber ministry, prison entrepreneurship program. Anything I could get my hands on that would give me an opportunity to retool the factory, if you will. Because I was a broken person with broken morals. I had no moral compass. I didn't know the Lord. And so this was, I was a blank slate, and it was a great opportunity for me. I look at the 3 years that I went to prison as the most pivotal season of my whole entire life, and I'm so very glad that it happened. So I get out of prison in 2007, paroled to Houston where I don't know anybody. Go to the open door mission, which I was kind of embarrassed to show up there because it sounded like a soup kitchen for hobos, and I thought, I'm like this radical, great person who's transformed his life and all this stuff. Well, I got humbled real fast. I got to ride the bus in the Houston metropolitan area for about 18 months, rode around on a bicycle, finally got my driver's license, finally got an apartment, and over time started putting together these pieces, and the Lord began to just weave people into my life. I got an opportunity in the Word Faith Connection to get a job there. I went there for job training to try and find a job. They offered me a job there. While I'm there, the boss said, I want you to go to Christian men's luncheons, things like this, on a regular basis. Start making some contacts. Start making some network for yourself. First one I show up at, I meet a guy named Rick Wirtz, who's the head of the Faithful Fathering Initiative. He starts asking me about my kids. I have a broken relationship with my kids. And he starts training me up to be a father that models Christ-like behavior, a father that has a physical presence with his kids. Well, that ship had sailed. I couldn't be the father that he was trying to equip me to be. And I thought I had missed my opportunity to do that, but I listened to the teachings of this man because he was willing to mentor me, and I needed all the work I could get, all the help I could get. So anyway, in my career at Work Faith Connection, I was able to meet the guy who's my current boss now, who's the chairman of our board. I always wanted to go back to the construction industry, and I was working at a nonprofit, which is great, and I enjoyed it. I became efficient at grant writing and fundraising and putting together events and did some teaching, and I wore a lot of hats when I was at Work Faith Connection for 8 years. But it came to a point where the money that you make in a nonprofit organization is kind of limited, and I met the woman that I would be getting married to, and so I wanted to get married with her. I wasn't planning to start a family, but ended up starting a family. And so I needed to leverage up to something that had a little bit higher capacity for advancement. So I got to go to work for Marek Brothers, which is a very impressive, great construction company that I never dreamed I would get to go to work there. And I thought if I did, I would be working at a field level where I would be, working maybe as a foreman someday. Well, I had an opportunity to work there as a project manager, which I'm the only project manager on our floor that doesn't have a degree in construction management. I don't have a high school diploma, okay? And so I walk in there and I think to myself, well, what gives me the audacity to think I can do this job? First of all, if these guys around me are real project managers, they can bring me up to speed, okay? So that was my challenge to them. Everybody stepped up and met that challenge. And over the last 8 years, I've been able to work on some of the biggest, most impressive projects. I've been able to get to a point where the first 2 or 3 years, I'll admit I was in over my head, and I didn't think I was going to ever make a profit for this company. But over the last couple of years, I feel like I'm adding to the bottom line, and I'm actually pulling my weight, and I'm helping other people, step up into the game. So I'm really enjoying that. I was able to get married, provide a house for my wife. My wife's a little younger than me. She wanted to have kids, and I learned not to argue with her a long time ago. And so we have 2 beautiful boys. Recently, one of my boys was diagnosed with, he has ALL, which is acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Initially, I thought it was a death sentence, but I realized that through all things, the Lord works. And I started seeing my wife step into the role as this mama bear that goes down to all these appointments with this kid at the hospital, prays with the people that work at the hospital, prays over the drugs that they put in this boy. And so over all these things have really reassured me that the Lord had a plan through even the hardest of my hard times. One of the things that I say when I talk about my work where I am today, that what gives me the audacity to think that I can step into the role that I'm in, is because I serve a God who was a healer, but he had no drugs. He took over the world, but he had no army. He was a teacher, but he had no degree. He got the death sentence, and he didn't commit a crime. He served the death sentence, and he's still alive. Okay, so based on that, a guy that's a deadbeat dad can step into the role of a good father. A guy who's a schmuck and a scoundrel can step into the role of a responsible employee. And a guy who's a liar, cheat, and thief can be a really good husband if he puts his heart to it. So it's been my honor to do that. I was going to tell you, so my wife, on that one shoe she had, that one verse that said Romans 8:28, in all things God is at work. On the other, she had my life verse, which was already read here today, which is 2 Corinthians 5:17. It says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, and behold, the new has come. So I get to live in that today and know that the Lord has a plan for my life. And I'm honored to speak with you guys here today. Opportunities like this are really, for me, not to just shine the light on me, but to shine the light on God. because the Lord has been so very gracious to me in a way that I never deserved. And so I am very, very honored today to be well on my way to the man that God has created me to be and step so far away from the person that I used to be. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Scott. Well, we're not done yet. We've got a little bit of a short Q&A. Is this you, Scott? Scott? Yeah, you're up here. So Scott, throughout his story, shared that there were various different people that intersected his story. Bert Smith is coming up. Bert is the president of the National Christian Foundation here in Houston. Stan Merrick, where's Stan? Stan's coming up this way. Stan is the big cheese over at Marek Brothers as well. You heard Scott mention that a little bit earlier. So we're going to have just a short little Q&A. Each of y'all should have a mic there, right there next to your chair. But I think it's amazing whenever you can look up here and you can hear Scott's story and you can see that there's spots that filled each of these chairs that have had an impact in Scott's life. And so, Bert, I want to start with you. I mean, you don't hear that kind of story every day. So when I'm sitting here and hearing Scott's story, I'm thinking, so you kind of are like an unusual suspect that, like, how are you in his life? So tell us how you got to know Scott. How did y'all's lives intersect?
The short answer is I met Scott in prison.
Say more, please.
So in late 2005, I was at the Houston Country Club for a breakfast meeting, a room pretty much like this. And the woman who started one of the programs Scott mentioned, prison entrepreneurship program, was speaking. And she began her presentation with this question. What if you were best known for the single worst thing you've ever done in your life? Yeah, that just kind of rested on me. Every job application, every time you want to open a bank account, rent an apartment, buy a car, do anything, there it is in headlines. Whatever that foul deed was. Well, I guess most of my friends would have characterized me at the time as sort of a choir boy. But I knew that I had lots of foul thoughts, said lots of angry, foul things, and done some things that could have put me in prison in the cell next to Scott. So I felt in that moment, honestly, just the Holy Spirit tapping on my shoulder saying, Bert, we've given you about 25 years of valuable education and business experience. It's time to go and give it away. So I volunteered to go in prison and help men who were committed to changing develop their ideas into an actionable business plan for a business they could start on release. And it was about 7 or 8 months after I started as a volunteer that I went in and met Scott. Little context, honestly, when I went to prison for the first time, I expected to meet dark, angry men. And I expected to feel very afraid. And I expected to be elevated relative to these men. Because they were in prison and I was not. Well, I learned pretty quickly that none of those things was true. I went in and met men like Scott. Well, actually nobody was quite like Scott. But I met men who were bright, who were optimistic, who were leaning into whatever God had left for them in life. And I just came away, honestly, inspired. I said, man, if I had half of the baggage, a tenth of the baggage that these guys have, how could I possibly carry that load and still maintain that perspective? So I went in expecting to serve and found that I was the one who was served. I would honestly, if I was asked to give a title to Scott's testimony, I would call it The Fruits of Redemption. And I can say that in my life, I have experienced the fruits of redemption as well in my relationships with other people, whether casual acquaintances or people I know well. I feel like I hope I do, far less judgment, much more listening than talking, much less telling. And so, you know, Scott, for me, has just been, for the last however many years, 15, 16 years we've known each other, just a reminder of the importance of that leaning on God to lean into what He has planned for me and for others for the rest of our lives.
That's a profound, go ahead. Well, what I was going to say was that's an amazing answer to the question, how did you and Scott meet? I just think that that's phenomenal that you can do that. But what I will say is that isn't it really cool how the Lord just has the power to suspend our agendas in order to fulfill His agenda. And I feel like that was certainly true in how you went into the prison. But it's evident that it was impactful for both you and Scott. And Scott, I'm gonna give you a chance to weigh in, but I want to go to Stan real quick. Stan, Scott just mentioned in his testimony that he has had the opportunity to work with your team, that you guys met at Work Faith Connection. But as I hear about and think about that reality, I mean, it's evident just in Scott's own words and in his life right now that that opportunity in many ways was yet another ginormous game changer for Scott, for his life, for his family. But as I think about you and the position that you sit, I'm thinking, I mean, this is not going to sound very nice, but in my mind, I'm kind of thinking, what were you thinking? You know, seeing Scott, meeting Scott, Work Faith Connection, you're going, you know, yeah, okay. And I mean, were there risks involved for you to step out and offer that position to Scott? And if they were, then what were you thinking?
Well, that's a good question. There's no quick answer. And I'm not one to, can everybody hear me okay?
Just keep it up close. Yeah.
Keep it up close, okay. You know, first of all, a little bit about us, a construction company. 85 years this year. My dad and his brothers came off a blackland farm in Yoakum, Texas. They lost it in the bank foreclosure in 1934. Were homeless 4 years. 1938, they came to Houston. Started hanging sheetrock. Not like we do today, but as labor. Went in the military after WW2. Started off very modest little company. We started off with 3 guys and 6 guys and 8 guys. Today we have several thousand guys. This is one of our projects. Everything you see here, we built. And the one thing that I realized my entire life, that I worked in the field, I was a union carpenter, is that people who work construction, they don't usually have college degrees. They don't usually have the whole lot of learning, as they say. And if you're hanging sheetrock, it's a hard physical labor. And not many people can do that. We have had so many people go through our doors in 85 years with records, out of prison, whatever. For years, we would recruit guys in prison, and that was the only guys we could find that might want to work. Of all the buildings we built all over the United States, what we're most proud of are the men like Scott who came out of a tough situation, learned to trade, learned how to use these hands to build something, to build a life, build America. And people that go through the hard times appreciate so much more the good that they have when they have it. So we were blessed that, my dad, many years ago, Barbara Elliott, you mentioned Barbara, started something called the Work-Faith Connection. It was a matter of how do you get yourself back after prison or homelessness or addiction. You do it through work, building self-esteem, and you do it with Christ, or a higher being. And so work faith is the way we came up with this name. And we would have graduations every Friday. And my dad at the time was in his late 80s. We'd go to every graduation. I'd go to just about every one too. And we'd have a group like Scotty, 8, 10, 15, 20 people sometimes, who'd get up and sort of talk a little bit about their life stories. And I remember sitting there, seeing these men out of prison, off of addiction, homelessness. They'd go through your program and come to us, and go to Star of Hope, Hank's program and come to us, and we'd give them a master's degree. And me sitting there saying, there, but for the grace of God go I. I mean, my God, I think back to my crazy, I was raised in a pretty dysfunctional family. And my dad, to the day he died, thought he was going to go broke. He thought he'd be homeless again. And we were raised poor. Hard to believe that looking back now, 70 years, but it was tough. But those lessons we learned and the respect that we got for the working men. I mean, my whole thing today is we need people in construction jobs. We need people who can build things, and we can't find people. Thank God for our Latino population. Our Texas wouldn't exist, and that's another whole story. But when I was really pleased when Scott went to work for Work Faith and was able to do his testimony to other groups. Going at people want to see somebody who's been successful, somebody who's kicked the habit, somebody who's dedicated to giving back, to changing their lives. And I was happy when Scott, after 8 years, I hated to see him leave Work Faith, but we took a chance, and I don't think but taking a chance, we saw an opportunity, and Scott has been there 8 years now. And it's been a very good relationship for him, his family, and to watch the growth of his family and the tough situation with your son, and I'm sure the good Lord has a plan there. It has been heartwarming because, there again, they're but the grace of God go I. And so I've really enjoyed getting to know people like Bert, people like Hank, and working with people like if my dad and his brothers, homeless, did not have the hard work and support of their Catholic church, Assumption Church, to give them the moral compass to do what they did, I may be exactly where Scott is. And I think we can all say that about certain times in our life and the things that we've been through. So a long answer for a short question.
Loved every word of it. Thank you, Stan. I'm going to ask you one question, Scott, and then I'm going to invite Tom Douthit to come up. But I want to say this. When I think about that statement, Stan, that you made about did we take a chance or did it actually turn out to be an opportunity? And I wonder if that's not applicable to all of our lives when I think about the story that Scott told and how the story that Bert told, the story you told, how it's all interwoven together for the good, as if by chance maybe that the good Lord might be somewhat involved in the construction business as well for us. And in many ways, not only the four of us up here, but every one of us that's in this room today are redemptive enterprises that he said it's worth the chance because I see an opportunity. So, Scott, my question to you, just to close us out up here and invite Tom up, is what say you to these two men? What say you?
Well, what I would say is, Stan, over the years, while I was at Work Faith, I saw Stan give opportunities to several people, and on many occasions they squandered the opportunity. And I remember stepping into that role and just feeling a very, I guess I could say pressure, that I had to make him feel like this was not a waste of time to give me this opportunity, and I also wanted to pave the way for people after me. Because I don't want people to give up on broken people, you know, and we're all broken, we all need help. And when you let people down over and over again, sometimes they just quit, you know, taking that risk. And so I had a special kind of something to prove to myself that I wasn't going to be a wasted risk, you know, kind of like even in our faith, you know, that Christ died for my sins. Okay, so what am I going to do with that? Am I going to just keep sinning and feel smug about getting away with it, or am I going to try and honor that and change my behavior? So that's what I'm trying to do with this job. Bert was kind of a father figure to so many of us over the years. He was he got an award for repeat attender at the prison events because he wouldn't stay away. I remember I was thinking, like, this guy must not have a life or something. He comes here all the time. He loved embracing the prison culture and loving on us guys there. I was there in prison basically celebrating my new opportunity at life. I wasn't moping around about being locked up. I was actually a little bit nervous about whether they were going to let me go because I was getting so much quality growth and learning while I was locked up, and just have really wanted to make a way. One thing I'll say, and I'll shut up because as you guys can tell, I can get going sometimes when I need to shut up. But when I was still drinking and using, I remember thinking to myself, if I could just see a guy that was a dope fiend like me clean up his life, I would know it was possible and I would follow him out of this life. And the Lord never provided that person for me. And when I ended up in prison and getting clean and sober and learning about the Lord, I remember the Lord just revealing to me is that He's going to use me to be that person for others. And there'll be another man somewhere that's looking for someone to look up to have hope. And so I have a responsibility to be that hope. And so that's kind of kept me going on a lot of levels. But these guys are very important to me. I'm so glad they were willing to come up and stand beside me on this stage because I am just kind of an old scoundrel trying to do the right thing at the end of the day. And so I appreciate that. Thanks.
Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. I'm going to invite Tom Douthit to come up as he makes his way up. Can we say thank you to Stan and to Scott and to Bert once again?